Yes. It's not careful. All right, let's comprehend. Okay. Is it quite of simple mathematics? It is mathematics. I will show you some mathematics, some percentages, and some ratios.
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Who is judging? Alex, are you not judging?
Mine is judging. No?
Really?
Who
is judging?
There we sorry for lift problem. Hello. We need extra space.
You're all right.
Hey, pushers.
Who's going first? Patrick. He or they? Oh.
Amira going first, Kelvin going second.
CG.
That's going first.
And Steve. The popular very round of PJDO 2018. I'm preparing this round. Before we begin the round, let's just do quick gender pronoun introductions. I prefer they, them, or gender neutral pronouns such as panel or speaker. OG. Patrick, he or they. Oh.
Amira Shiode.
Kelvin, no preference.
CG.
Azif, you're late.
Sila Shide.
And Sino.
Is that here?
Okay. Also, let's have an iPhone cable. All right, I'm the motion that we're in. Alright, without any further ado, the motion is on the Prime Minister. Thank you.
Just to make sure we're well aware, this is an actor debate. That being said, this is what we're going to do on site opening government. 3 mechanisms. Firstly, we're going to cut down on all forms of infrastructures that are deemed to be unnecessary. This includes, but are not limited to, the high-speed railway to Singapore, the East Coast Railway, and also MRT3, because we don't care about Bandar Utama. Secondly, we are going to increase taxation. This means, for example, introducing the capital gains tax, which, by the way, is a tax that is actually levied upon purchase and selling of things, for example, like stocks, bonds, precious metals, property. Thirdly, there will be no extravagant nationalistic projects, for example, like the third national car or Bandar Tun Razak. Like, it's quite an ugly building, so we're actually more than happy to remove it. So what's the burden of opening government in this debate? Twofold. Number one, we'll prove to you why this is an objectively better decision for the Malaysian economy. But secondly, we also show you, whilst fulfilling our primary burden, which is like, the economy, we can still retain power in the next and upcoming election to make sure that, it's this an active debate. We have to also think of the interest of the party. But note that the primary benefit outweigh the secondary benefit. And we think that even if, for example, principally, we are elected in to serve this government, not the party, and therefore, obligation-wise, we have to serve what's best for the people, not what's best for the party. So taking into that account, I have 4 arguments for you today. Number 1, what are the austerity measures targeting? Number 2, why does the Pakatan government need to do for the economy? Thirdly, what is economically beneficial for Malaysia? And fourthly, will this affect our chances of re-election? For context, before I take any POI from them. Firstly, we are talking about a world in 2018 where the stock and the bond market crashed at the same time. The same hasn't been seen since 1987. Usually when the stock market crash, people will buy bonds, but in this instance, people are stopped buying for both things. This means that unfortunately, it's going to affect the second context of developing countries. Countries, for example, like Turkey, Brazil have dropped recently, and we think that this is affecting a global contagion effect where people are not buying into the stocks and economy of Malaysia. Thirdly, the ringgit is sliding against the USD, and we don't see it rising against any form of regional currencies in the near future. Fourthly, this debate has to happen taking into context that our dear government has already told everyone about the depth of the shithole that the previous government left us. This means that we are unlikely to repatriate any form of YMDB funds. We are well aware of the graft cases that have happened. We are aware of the fact that we are indebted in 1 trillion ringgit. So these are the 4 contexts that have to be taken into account when we're assessing how this debate should go and what the Pakatan government should do that. Before I go on, sure.
So just a quick clarification on unnecessary projects. What are they? So meaning if a project costs like a couple of billions but can give even more billions in return, is that unnecessary?
I'll wait for you to tell me what these projects are, but based on the current projects that we have in the pipeline, which are the ones that I've illustrated above, we'll cancel all of them. Firstly, what are the austerity measures targeting? I'll go into fiscal and monetary. Fiscal, when it comes to taxation, currently they are overspending, for example, on subsidies that are unfortunately targeting the wrong group. What do we mean? These things, for example, things like blanket subsidies that are levied upon things like petroleum, petrol, things, for example, like rice, that unfortunately benefits the poor, no, but it benefits the rich the most, because these are the individuals who are inevitably buying the most rice. These are the people who will be buying the most petrol because they're the ones using the most cars anyways. So this means that right now there's not a proper spending onto like current ways of how we necessarily should trade this money, and at the same time, taxations and tax rates are given to highly, for example, rich individuals. These are people, for example, that we cannot collect taxation from, or even if we do levy some upon them, they will just inevitably not pay the taxes. This is why we think austerity measures, for example, like capital gains tax, target the people the most. This is the most progressive form of taxation where we target the rich, in the sense that if we are talking about trading a property, things, for example, like trading of bonds, if you can afford to do that and you can already profitize from that, we think a mere 10% or 20% upon those form of like profit that you're already making won't hurt you anyways. Note that this is not a debate where we make them lose money. Instead, it's just reducing the amount of money that they profit. But when we talk about subsidies, then ultimately we think it's beneficial for us to use those money then to generate, for example, economy for the poor, or basically to give back in form of redistribution policies for the people. Secondly, when it comes to spendings, right now, the remnants of the BN government was to basically spend money on flashy projects that apparently can benefit people, but actually they can't. So we mean, for example, things like railways, which are white elephants that looks as if it generates occupation, but unfortunately doesn't go through any of the eastern like main towns. So unfortunately, there will be no creation of jobs there. And ultimately, secondly, the only reason they agree upon those projects are because they want to, like, be in cohorts with China cronies in order to put more money into their pockets. So we think ultimately those spendings will result in a deficit spending. There's 2 problems. Number 1, there's more burden for future generations and it will take longer for them to repay the debt. The debt won't go away if you just ignore that it happens. Secondly, the debt to GDP ratio will inevitably increase. Right now, our debt to GDP ratio is sitting at 80%. Anything above the you can tell me an alternative number, but anything above that is going to be harmful towards the economy because it's much harder as a developing country to bounce back. Second argument, what does the Pakatan need to do then for the economy? We think that right now, when you're running upon the platform of meritocracy, you have 3 things to do. Number 1, you cannot be seen as a populist government that's simply pandering to the people because they want something, you give them something. Secondly, you have to do away with money politics, which are basically something that you have objectively pledged to do away with. This means, for example, flashy projects. But thirdly, you must do what's right instead of what is you must do what's right for the people instead of what you feel should benefit yourself. This means that right now, knowing that there's full knowledge of all this information, you then ought to, for example, be responsible towards the people in order to make sure that you do what is hurting right now the most, but in the future is able to generate more form of benefits for the people, because that's what governments do. Thirdly, why is this economically beneficial then? 3 ideas. Number 1, to stabilize the economy. Right now, if we continuously pump money into the economy, nothing good will happen beyond just crashing it in the long run. Right now, understanding that our property market is already going in the bubble, continuing to spend more on infrastructure, which means that it prompts up a perverse incentive for developers to build more apartments around those places where inevitably it shoots up the price of property. Nobody buys them, inevitably it will crash. Secondly, Malaysia is operating on what we call a floating market. This means that a lot of time our assets are over-evaluated, and there needs to be a corrective mechanism that's put in place to actually lower down the estimates that we have. This is, for example, the World Bank reduced from 5.4% to 4.8%, and why Malaysia is also reducing its growth rate to 4.3%. So therefore, we think austerity allows us to look upon these things to make sure that we evaluate them correctly. The third idea, we need to weed out systematic and systemic problems like they are present that we need to know and uncover, because needlessly spending money without fixing these problems means that there'll be more leakages and drainage that will happen in the future as well. So we think austerity allows us to take a step back and reevaluate what are the problems that we need to solve. Fourthly, will this harm our chance of re-election? Mubara will talk more about it, but as a preface, is related to the individual. So basically, there are visible changes everywhere. So people won't simply go back to the neo-BN past coalition, because unfortunately, they know that we already promised them from the very beginning that we are going to take a hit when we elect in a new government that's going to reform a lot of problems that are happening right now. This means that there are a lot of examples that we can show to them that are visible beyond economic changes. This means, for example, things like social economic changes. This means, for example, things like removing patronage, removing corruption. These are all visible things that are basically the reason why people voted out BN in the first place. So we think with all the reasons above, it's more likely that as Pakatan, we should fully embrace austerity measures. Extremely proud to propose.
I really think Patrick is stuck in his privilege bubble, the point at which he comes up here and says, we are going to take away oil subsidies. We are going to stop ongoing planning of public transport plans. Who do you think all of that benefits the most? It benefits the middle class. These people who are already privileged, who are rich, don't need that assistance, right? All of the manifestos and the current structures of which Pakatan Harapan is trying to provide is trying to empower that middle class. And that's why we, speaking from the perspective of Pakatan Harapan, would insist on still doing. Two questions in my speech. Number one, why we think this is not in the best interest of the actor in this debate, Pakatan Harapan. And number two, why we think that this is harmful for our economy. Most of my rebuttals will be integrated because I think a lot of what we heard from Prime Minister was a lack of characterization as to how exactly Pakatan Harapan got into power to begin with, right? Because currently, we think that Pakatan Harapan won the previous election because BN was extremely irresponsible in their financial decision making that reduced the mobility of people. This is not just talking about the but also things like GST, that if you notice, was a form of austerity measure, right? People found it crippling. The reason why people didn't want it was because they didn't feel that it was financially empowering the everyday person that was earning a minimum wage or below minimum wage and trying to survive in being able to live their everyday lives and provide for their families. Given the fact that removing the biggest clincher for many middle classes to vote for Pakatan Harapan, because not all of them were just because of liberals or because they wanted to just remove corruption. Many of them question, corruption only matters to me insofar as it affects my everyday life. If that corruption led to the reason why BN then had to instill all of these policies that made things more expensive in everyday life because they needed to instill an austerity measure, and the austerity measure was GST, that's why I'm no longer going to vote for BN and I'm going to end up voting for Pakatan Harapan, because people think from their own perspectives. So the point at which Pakatan Harapan now is backtracking and saying that we are now going to instill austerity measures, which was the very turn off that many of the voters that existed during this recent general election, I think that that's going to end up losing a lot of the voter base that people, that Pakatan Harapan is meant to have in the coming election. But also, I think that Pakatan Harapan also, in the run-up to the election, focused a lot on the debt crisis, because not just necessarily in such an illustration where the debt crisis is so bad as if it was Greece, that we are crippling and non-functioning, but more because it was very easy to justify and it was a very easy rhetoric to also ride, given the fact that, coming election is not just about the economy, but also how you politicize and play out those economic problems, right? We think that if we move away from the idea of financially empowering individuals and then implementing austerity measures, we lose that populism. Patrick comes up here and says that populism doesn't matter. Populism was the very clincher as to why we saw that change in government, right? We think that the point at which you are a new government and you are a new political party finally gaining that power, the point at which you are trying to shake the boat too much, given the fact that you are trying to backtrack on a lot of those things, I think that it's a very dangerous game to play. And speaking from the perspective of Pakatan Harapan, it's very likely that you're going to get outvoted come next election. Secondly, we think that what they're proposing requires Pakatan Harapan to backtrack on a lot of their manifestos. Coming in, their manifestos look like things like increase public housing, increase the number of jobs, increase minimum wage to 1,500, hopefully by 2020, increasing productivity via the inclusion of automation. All of this requires money, and it helps everyday individuals live their lives without wondering if they'll survive tomorrow. The goal out of all of this was to financially enrich and empower the mobility of people to be able to survive. In status quo, already recently, if you go on Twitter, you will see the number of tons of tweets mocking Pakatan Harapan for backtracking on their erasing the toll idea, right? Especially when the rhetoric that Pakatan Harapan had as a justification later on was that we never really had plans of actually meeting those goals of erasing the idea of tolls because we weren't sure if we were going to win, and people made fun of them for that, right? So in status quo now, if you try to backtrack on many of your other manifestos because you're trying to clinch onto the principle of austerity measures, people now are going to find it even a lot harder for them to believe all of the other manifestos that you will have to say come next election. Because tolls are something that were important to people, but negligible. But when you are now saying that your austerity measures are going to go into the idea about minimum wage, it's going into the number of jobs you're providing for them, things that actually matter to people on the ground, on their everyday life, in wondering whether or not they'd be able to support their families, that's going to hurt them. So I don't think that this, under any realm, is something that is reasonable. Secondly, why we think this is harmful for our economy. I need to emphasize this. Our debt exists, but it is not crippling. It is not to a point where you need to take on these austerity measures, which means there are many other methods of which you can turn to in order to solve that debt while ensuring you get to empower individuals on the ground. Before I move on, since it's the 5th minute, are there any questions? Close. Yeah.
So, are they really truly backtracking? Do we really support? Because every other thousands of tweets will have the opposite. Every other elections, and was proven, does mean that Pakatan is getting more votes, is getting more support.
That's not true at all, right? Given the fact that if they're backtracking, anything you put forth on the table come next election, people cannot trust. That trust was important for people to be able to see that you were bringing changes. The point at which you say, hey, at least we brought out the old corrupted government, but we're being, equally bad when it comes to all these other things and not actually enriching individuals, bringing people out of poverty, making the youth feel like they have a future to save up for. I don't think that that's something that people will simply ignore and not take into account come next election, especially when you notice many of the previous BN politicians are now trying to ride on that populism bandwagon, right? They're like, look, Pakatan Harapan is backtracking. We also can become progressive. The point at which BN moves further into the center from the right, and they're also trying to compete with what is more popular, the point at which they have at least evidence to say Pakatan Harapan is backtracking, but BN is at least trying to be more progressive because Najib is out of the picture and we've got people like KJ, then that becomes a dangerous game for you to play. But why we think that this is harmful for our economy? I think that it doesn't matter if the government tries to solve this debt in the most extreme of measures, the point at which your people on the ground have to take on debts because they don't have a meaningful minimum wage, because they don't have meaningful pay or jobs. As it is, Mubarak complains about the tax as it is, right? And she's not even coming from the struggling class. Can you imagine the average person who is actually starting out a job and trying to gain 1,050 when what they want is 1,500, and then Pakatan Harapan says they can't give you that 1,500, even though 1,500 actually really doesn't amount to much when you're competing in the global scale. That's why a lot of our youth that actually can bring development to our country move out. When these people move, when there's not enough purchasing power within the country, when there's not enough cash flow within the state, FDIs don't find it attractive either. Literally on all aspects, whether economic or political, you are losing the game. That is not something that Pakatan Harapan should be for. Thank you.
I think austerity in Malaysia happens in a slightly different context to the one that opening opposition imagines, and just like copycats from Greece. A few differences. First, being that it's relatively easier to just cut a lot of things that we're not doing a lot for the economy to begin with, which is unique to Malaysia, i.e. tax breaks unnecessarily given to huge amounts of nepotistic businesses that were not necessarily creating jobs or value. Those are money we can easily take out without actually harming the poor people they talk about. If anything, removing that money from the super rich actually creates more equality than anything. Second, in terms of, so that's one of the aspects in which it happens. Second, if you're talking about government spending, for example, we have humongous amounts of money promised to China for no reason at all for projects that will put us in debt. Why would you want to do that? Like, there are also, for example, like the youth and ministry tweets from the private secretary tell us that 60 to 80% of the budget was already promised to UMNO youth groups for their own campaign and financing. Like, if that's the case, those are huge amounts of budget cuts that are easily available to the government without going through and attacking the poor people that opening opposition pretends opening government is doing, i.e. a humongous amounts of very reachable austerity is possible by the Pakatan Harapan government without talking about the humongous harms that opposition bench talks about. But don't worry, we'll even take the worst case. No, thank you. So I think that's the background context. It's not as harmful as Greece. But the second reason and the second thing that we must keep in mind here is this. The context is different to the one that where Pakatan Harapan stood up for election. I.e., when they came on board, they found out that UMNO had lied or hidden a lot of its deficits in the budget, i.e. the circumstances are changed, and that is explainable to the general public about why they have to change, right? The $1 trillion debt problem, 1 billion ringgit debt problem was not known to the public before Pakatan Harapan even came into power, i.e. there's a changed context with transparent information people can understand. But thirdly, and I think very important to note, is this. When a country is in a billion ringgit debt problem, the issue is this. The issue isn't do we do austerity or not. The question is, do we do austerity now or do we do austerity with a future generation? That's the question. And I would argue that current society today is much better positioned to do it. So first, like, look, opening opposition has a very Machiavellian way of looking at things. Like, will we get re-elected? If not, fuck this. Sorry. Screw this, whatever. The question is, let's take their framing at their best, right? Like, we have to have a Machiavellian way of looking at it, and whatever doesn't help the Pakatan Harapan government, we can't take it. No, thank you. Is this, like, they're saying, like, people will not trust you because you're backtracking on your promises. I think with clear communication, Pakatan Harapan government has actually seen that people are quite understanding about it. Like, so for example, like, they came on board and said Tabung Harapan, and people started donating shit tons of money. Was a backtracking on like just removal of GST, but people were on board with it because people understand that those are necessary things that need to be done. I think this is an amazing opportunity to do it because you have a population ready to make the sacrifices for you. Even if you're thinking of like your own interest, think about this. You can't just think of the next re-election. What happens when you get re-elected and you come back and then you realize you have done unsustainable things in the future? You need to think of multiple re-elections. Otherwise, you can't stay in power beyond 2 terms, right? So you have to think of really long term. And I think if you do that, then you have to realize that doing it now has the least harm on you, even if you think it harms you, than doing it in the future, right? And if you're going to say, but no, deficit spending is amazing, we're going to only do projects that are going to return us humongous amounts of money, the problem is this. Given the foreign like entities already know your $1 trillion ringgit problem, borrowing to spend money has becoming more and more expensive. I.e., you have to pay more interest now to borrow money in order to spend more on infrastructure. So, i.e., it's becoming even harder to get returns on projects you're doing now. That's why you have to like cut your spending now to get your credit ratings back up before you can borrow more, because otherwise it's not a sustainable policy anymore because it's more expensive to invest for the Malaysian government right now. And the longer you wait, the worse it gets. The higher the budget the debt gets, the less likely people are willing to give you money for a low amount of interest, i.e. the problem becomes significantly worse over time, and that's why you can't have the returns of a deficit spending that Kelvin wants to have. No, thank you. So in this instance, I think that is particularly important. But I think the also opening opposition so far has refused to engage with the framing that Patrick provided. That, like, I think we've already dealt with the Machiavellian framing. But I think that we should not go down the path of UMNO, which is to say, hey, what gets us re-elected, let's just do that. I think the priority is, if we can prove that in itself it's inherently good to do it now, there is a good enough reason to follow through on those economic policies, because that's long-term benefit for the rakyat. I think that should take first priority, because the first mistake you can do as a Pakatan Harapan government is to follow through on the steps of UMNO, which is to say, whatever gets us re-elected, we'll just do. Sure.
So you say we're only getting rid of unnecessary stuff or redundancies that benefit the privileged. What's the difference between just having a normal responsible budget versus your austerity?
We are arguing that austerity is a normal responsible budget right now, given the context. But I think that's number one. Number two, I don't think we said we're not going to have anything that takes away money from people, right? We are happy to support continuous tolls from roads, for example, and like all of the random examples of MRT projects that Patrick gave, right? We're happy to support those things. We're just putting things into context that it is not as draconian as the opposition thinks, as it like we're like Greece, like we're going to have no spending at all. I don't think that's the same. So I think austerity measures, fully embracing it in the Malaysian context, can be done in a reasonable manner, i.e. it doesn't have the same amount of cost that you're thinking of in Greece, but rather it is something that allows us to bounce back in the future and allows us to be sustainable in the future. I think that's my put here. Okay, so why is it that austerity measures are actually like good for long-term development? So I think infrastructure-wise, to a large extent, not saying perfect, but Malaysia has like a significant amount of roads and education systems already put up. So there is no immediate necessity to put an investment down for a 25-year long-term return. So I don't think that necessity exists in the immediate short run as well. Malaysia also has fully functional healthcare systems, relatively well-functional healthcare systems. It's just true, like compared to all other developing countries, people can actually get healthcare for really cheap prices. Those are things that already exist in Malaysia. So I don't see a reason to continue increasing deficit spending over there. Like, I think Malaysia has leeway to do it. Rather follow Singaporean models, i.e. you can go ahead and tax corporations as long as you provide a corruption-free area for them to come in, create ease of business to come in. That means we rely on the private sector to create a lot of the jobs that didn't currently exist. Private sectors are perfectly fine with paying higher amounts of tax if that means a cleaner system of governance for them to be able to come in and do it. So I think in the long run, we create sustainability for the country. We propose.
To put the case of the opposition.
So really, we don't really know what's the difference between austerity measures and just prudent financial spending in opening government. Because if truly what you're doing is just cutting down on unnecessary spending, cut down, it's unnecessary. The debate involves a trade-off where something is necessary, but it comes in the long run in terms of returns on investment. Whether you'll cut back on it now, that's an austerity measure. It comes in forms of taxes and spending cuts. So really, things that Patrick talked about in his speech, right? Like reducing corruption, trying to solve the property bubble, the too much buying of properties. Like, these are all things that can be solved through prudent financial planning and policies that are absolutely unrelated to austerity. So I don't know why any of these problems are going to be solved by the opening government. That's just so far a cop-out case and I expect something else from closing government. Now, in my speech, I'm going to do a couple of things. The first, I'm going to talk about whether or not the debt concerns are real, because, like, just to highlight you guys, Pakatan Harapan lied to you. Secondly, why the lack of a capital inflow through whatever capital gains tax you place, less strains, removal of petrol subsidies, is likely to hurt the poor to the extent that they're going to feel like they were betrayed and they're more likely to vote you out in the next election. So firstly, are the debt concerns real? Now, they don't really tell us why the debt is important, right? Or why we really need to reduce debt. And the reason why we generally need to reduce debt is because at the point which we are close to a default or we have a risk of a default, people are less likely to give you credit, less likely to invest in your country. And that's why debts are generally a problem, right? Do we really have a debt problem though? Our debt to GDP ratio is at 62%. That is a normal number comparing to the relative standard of the globe, right? Singapore's debt to GDP ratio is at 90%. Their credit rating is fine, which extends me to say also that our credit rating is fine. We don't really have a problem with higher interest rates from loan providers right now. So I don't really know why there's a huge urgency to reduce this debt problem, right? The 1 trillion number that PH gave you during the election cycle was actually like quite inflated by LGE, right? It was more like $700 billion, and in terms and like other like figures that weren't actually debt but just put into as debt in a populist fashion, right? Sorry, Raja, if you're like whatever. I'm not calling you liars. Most of you are truthful. I'm on live stream. Anyways, yes, most of it was a lie. So debt concerns aren't real. I have no real reason to believe why the debt concerns are real. Therefore, the risk of cutting spending and making sure that people have less money in their pockets is completely unnecessary risk to begin with and highly unstrategic to begin with, right? So then Patrick in his speech gave me some like context, like the stock market crash, not seen since 1987, ringgit sliding. I don't know what any of this means. He sounds like a public mutual salesman who's trying to get me into his program by telling me absolutely unnecessary information. I don't know why this is a concern for Malaysia right now. There are plenty of things I haven't seen since 1987. And these are like, I don't know what it means, right? No, thank you. So next, why is this actually a problem? So at the point in which you reduce capital inflow, how do you do this? If you increase capital gains tax, what usually happens is people are less likely to invest in your country, right? That's because they have to pay a lot more tax in terms of investing in your country. So a lot of fund houses, people put their money in like PNB or public mutual, like various funds or investing within the stock market are also less likely to see returns that are valuable for them. You're removing petrol subsidies, which has literally been sustaining all the motorcyclists on our roads for so long, from getting from Old Klang Road to KL. Like, these are individuals who are less likely to be able to sustain an actual decent lifestyle, right? You promised minimum wage, you promised to remove GST, you promised to increase spending, even though you said the debts are high, and people still voted you in because they felt that the money in their pockets just was not enough. So when you don't have trains getting into the jobs, they give them competitive wages because less competitive wages are available because people are not investing in your country, and you don't have petrol subsidies, then this is the amount of money that people will not be having in their pockets, right? And come the next election, when you don't have a long-term economic crisis because the debt problem isn't real, but people substantially have less money to spend and they don't feel that they're any different from 5 years ago when BN was in power, that's when they're going to feel like their promises have not been fulfilled. And that is hugely troubling. But before I go on here.
Okay, we can raise minimum wage, it's not a problem. But if you think our policy is just prudent financial decisions, are you also against MRT projects, toll collections?
If they're not prudent, if they don't give returns on investments, like the MRT is likely to connect a really currently unconnected area to a more central area, which means people are more likely to get access to jobs, right? Like petrol subsidies is like, if you're going to remove petrol subsidies and remove the trains, then I don't see how this actually helps people in general, right? So yeah, that's prudent financial planning, bro. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyways, so what does this mean? And even in the worst case scenario, by the way, even if capital gains tax, even if you will actually just affect the rich, the ability for the rich to like trickle down a lot of their benefits to the poor is also removed, right? Because not only do you lose support from like the middle and the upper middle class, like in KL and Selangor, that actually lobbied to put Pakatan Harapan into government and were one of the largest support bases. On top of that, these are individuals who are less likely to be able to employ people. These are individuals who are more likely to have to subsidize or pay more in order to like get these people to work, right? I think that sort of loss in like support and opportunity to these individuals is more likely to put them in a position of not voting in for Pakatan Harapan. So the question then becomes, the final question then is, will people vote in Pakatan Harapan, and is this in the interest of the Pakatan Harapan government, right? Because if it's shown that their promises have not been kept because they are implementing austerity measures, if additionally people have less money in their pockets because of all the increase in taxation and the less competitive wages that they currently have, and on top of that, like even if the debt remains the same, people who voted in Pakatan Harapan to remove GST are the same people who are going to vote in Pakatan to remove remove Pakatan Harapan, right? Because that's when the BN government will come in and say, hello, they didn't do all these things. You are just as poor as you were back then. Look at me, I'm a reformed political party headed by Kari Jamaluddin and everyone else is in jail. So we can go on from here and do a great job, right? I think that's when Pakatan Harapan loses a lot of their political capital. I think it's also dangerous at the point which Mahathir is dead and people are not voting them in just because of Mahathir anymore. So as much as possible, we should be as populist as possible in order to give them as much money. That's just really good strategy for these individuals. And we told you why, as far as strategy goes, giving people money and putting money in their pockets is actually good economic policy, right? Like they have more spending power. At the point they have more spending power, people are more likely to come in and invest as well. This was present in my speech. Like I already heard it as well. Thank you.
House thanks being low and opening half. Open the closing half house and vice versa. Thank you.
Panel, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Wait, Silat, it's not working. Sorry about that. So this is the triple sorry. I won't do that again. Panel, the problem within this debate is that you have a very messy opening half. We don't know what is these austerity measures. OG argues that it's a reduction in costs. OO argues, oh, it's the same thing. It's prudent necessary measures, therefore we'll do the same. Because at this point, I don't know what exactly are we arguing for. Everyone's just throwing out economic facts without nuancing this to the actual scene of the Malaysian government, without nuancing this to the actual interests of the Malaysian politics. What will CG extend to you? We'll talk to you about how exactly this enables us to capitalize on the current players within the Pakatan Harapan government, namely Mahathir and Anwar Ibrahim. But we will also tell you on why exactly we are able to sell austerity measures we are much more able to sell austerity measures than we are going to do everything else. Just to be clear, like perhaps we'll be defending things like the reduction of similar things to OG, reduction of unnecessary costs, but if we can reduce these costs, for example, the reducing of the LRT3 from 33 billion to cut it in half, ensuring that the reduction of certain subsidies, we're fine with that. If we have to take the harm and the trade-off of harming people's abilities for them to enjoy a better life for the poor, right now we're willing to take that trade-off because we think within this debate, it's important for us to realize the context. You don't do austerity measures forever. You do it within a crisis. You do it until the economy stabilizes. And why exactly is it in a strut? And how exactly can we deal with that? That will be our extension. But before that, a few other responses from opening opposition that doesn't link back, that can't integrate within my argumentation. Firstly, we tell you that it is true and it is problematic that they just refuse to give us any chance of analysis as to how exactly this backtracking means in harms for Pakatan Harapan. The only thing Matt ever told you was there are tweets about people getting angry. Yeah, sure, I can find the other 1,000 tweets on the other side. I can find tweets by bots from UMNO. I can find tweets from Trump bots. Tweets doesn't mean actual voting changes. So what you can see instead is the number of support for policy. The very fact that the Anwar Ibrahim's election meant that he won a lot more. The very fact that people campaigned a lot more and people protested in support for Zaid Hamidi and Najib's arrest. The very fact remains that we are a nation whose poor isn't really that problematic. We have zero hardcore poverty in this nation. Only 0.1% of this nation is actually poor. This means the ability for the people to be able to understand and have a good life at the very least for the moment does exist. But what is the comparative then? Because that comparative of spending more money seems so utopian. Where are they getting this money? Who is investing with them? We've seen no other responses. How like this is true? How exactly is all their spending sustainable? And because Kelvin wants to argue to you, there is no debt. There's no debate lah. We have to assume at a certain point there is some value of debt that you do need to solve these things. So I think it's problematic that they just refuse to engage on that. But even then, we tell you, you do need a return to stability. It is important for you to understand the context that Mubarak wanted to say, that we went from a debt of 600 billion to 1 trillion for within 1 day of government control. That is a shift in context that we need to understand. Now, before I move to my argumentation, Kelvin or CG. Sorry.
So the reason why OO is wrong when it comes to talking about why people are being hateful to backtrack is because we have to analyze the people who voted for us in 2018. These are like Malay conservative people, rural areas who already have some attachment to UMNO. Why wouldn't they vote for UMNO if you feel the process?
Yes. So this leads on exactly to my extension. How exactly can we capitalize on our players? I think, panel, it's important for us to realize that right now there is no alternative for Pakatan Harapan. They can't get new FDIs from other nations. Any deal from China will be unfair, and people are angry already at the Chinese deals. You can't get FDIs from the USA because, well, they're led by Trump, and our Prime Minister admits to being an anti-Semite. You have the UK who's just so problematic because of Brexit. You have Saudi who's angry because we said that they're complicit to the corruption of our nation. And you have Singapore that this Mahdi just doesn't like. So you can't get any other access and no other alternatives. So when there is no other alternatives, we tell you that the duty is for you to focus on austerity. Why austerity specifically? Because austerity is something that's much easier for you to analyze. It's much easier for you to explain to the common layman. The ability for you to explain prudency within national spending, the ability for you to explain the multitudes level, the projection of the economy is something that's more problematic that the average person is unable to explain. And we need that explanation so that they are able to trust within our system, to be able to trust in Mahathir and Anwar, that we are able to show them a more visceral and concrete value of what austerity is. It means cutting down the spending from LRT in half. It means removing the contract with MMC Gamuda, even if it's problematic, and we can mitigate these things. Tony Poa released an open letter and multiple press conferences to prove and tell you why exactly it's okay. We showed how exactly the capital gains tax can benefit the people, and the comparative here is multiple risky plans that people can question. Why is it important that we do it on our stance? Because we tell you right now that people who voted Pakatan in because they had a very good leader and because, well, Najib was corrupt. The ability for us to make use of Mahathir and use his nostalgia and the trust that people have of him is important, and that's specifically why we need to do it right now. That Mahathir is seen as the granddaddy and the captain of the ship for this nation who can utilize that trust. This was the same guy who lifted our country from the 1998 economic crisis. This was the same guy who, through his austerity measures back in the 80s and 90s, managed to uplift our economy and build up Jaya and Jaya. Yeah, it's empty, but like it's still there. And this means the ability for him to create a stable platform is important, because that is a stable platform that Pakatan Harapan necessarily needs. Why do they need that? They need that because they need a platform of transfer of power. This means the ability for them to ensure a stable platform for Anwar Ibrahim to enter as Prime Minister. The ability for them to ensure that people remember Anwar as the continuation of Mahathir, because people don't have the same value of nostalgia as of Anwar as they do of Mahathir. People don't remember of Anwar as being the guy who ensured that the debt crisis was kept unproblematic. People will need, therefore what we do need is the ability for us to create that idea, to create that precedence, that Anwar is part of that context. Why is it important then? Because we tell you that the comparative of making ambitious plans is making sure that everything is held. That the end is comparing everything else. And we tell you, when your projects fail, any attempt or any ideas of it may be failing is an attempt and ammo that the end can use towards the government. And we tell you right now, we need stability, trust, and strength. We do not need to give UMNO more ammo for them to attack the Pakatan Harapan. We do not need UMNO to give more power for them to doubt and put doubt into the regimes of Mahathir and Anwar, for the continuation of the Pakatan Harapan government, and for them to ensure that they can win the next election. Go CG.
Okay, cool. So my extension will be twofold. Firstly, we're going to ensure that the victory is secured for the next election, very different from opening opposition. Secondly, I'm going to tell you the significant impact this has on the economy, dealing with most of what opening opposition said, considering most of their material more or less relied on this not having a very big impact on Malaysia. The first one is how we best ensure victory for the upcoming elections. There's something important to note here, is that while it is true that no matter what happens, I don't think we have reason to believe that in the next election, non-Malays are going to vote for UMNO or that Malay liberals are going to vote for UMNO, right? We think that this is a voter base that you're going to secure regardless. We will give this to opening opposition. There is another voter base that is the sole differentiating factor when it comes to whether or not you win the next election. This is the Malay conservative population that could possibly vote either way, depending on which party currently affects them in a tremendous manner. These were the individuals who single-handedly handed over Shah Alam to the current government. These were the people who were BN stronghold for the longest time until very recently. This is the population that determines whether or not you will win the next election, and this is the one that we have to secure. Why is it that, so how is it that we best secure this population in the next elections? Mubarak told you that this population is extremely understanding and they know more or less what's happening, right? Firstly, you have to know that this is an extremely vulnerable population. They will look exactly at what the government is doing to them on a personal level and they will vote accordingly, as these people have been, they feel that they're disenfranchised for the longest time. This is the easiest thing for UMNO to capitalize on the next election. For example, firstly, the idea that the individuals who had promised you all these things are now backtracking on most of their promises is one, as Owen mentioned. But secondly, also note that it goes far beyond that. It goes literally bringing, make it quick.
Yeah, the new election commission has publicly said that they will reverse the gerrymandering that Barisan Nasyah has put in place. This significantly reduces the conservative power that you're talking about. If that is out of the way, then why is your policy economically beneficial?
Okay, firstly, reversing this gerrymandering did not actually happen. We didn't see it happen. We have no reason to believe that it would actually happen for the next election, right? But secondly, also note that even if you were to reverse the gerrymandering, right? This is still a significant population and Shah Alam is still a big stronghold. So if you see the way the map is drawn, it's still a very big thing that you're going to win for the next election, right? We don't see where that argument plays in, in this debate, right? Also, gerrymandering mostly happens in minority populations to sort of secure people who wouldn't have otherwise voted for you, right? But secondly, also note that they talked about so furthermore on how the capitalization happens, right? These individuals are impacted on a direct level when it comes to the way the government is making its economic decisions. And this is the population that has been for the longest time extremely sick of a government that keeps backtracking on most of its decisions, right? So the point in time in which austerity measures are taken, these individuals will feel that the government is directly impacting them on a greater level, as I'll elaborate on later. But moving on to the second thing, dealing with closing government, they said that there's no alternatives whatsoever. Guys, this isn't Zimbabwe, right? You have a national treasury, there's still some money, you can still use that money very well. If there was no money whatsoever, I'd go back to my country. That's the point of being here. All right. So this is a situation. So yes. So I think it's reasonable to believe that the Treasury has enough money to take decisions. This debate is obviously a comparative on: do you want to continue with the current trend in which you allow constant investments, you take low taxes, or do you want to move on to a different decision where you take austerity measures? But lastly, moving on to this Mahathir's image thing and nostalgia, right? Look, the last thing we want is people to get nostalgic for UMNO and want those people back, right? We would rather that these individuals stay with the current government. But how is it that we can secure this for them? Because firstly, the sense of betrayal is no longer there. These individuals don't feel that the government had betrayed them on any significant level. But secondly, also note this whole Mahathir's image will be affected for the next elections, right? We don't think this is necessarily the case, because coming back to the World Bank example, right? Everyone was telling this country to take a loan from the World Bank. It was framed as something that was necessary and that there was no alternative to do so. Very similar to their arguments right now on austerity measures. The fact that he had deliberately refused to do so and save the economy on his own was something that he could only was something that Malaysia was very capable of doing even at that point in time, and when the economy wasn't as good as it is today. But secondly, moving on to the impact that this has on the economy. Mubarak said that there's going to be altogether less investment because there's low credit rating and less companies will be incentivized to enter this market, right? Firstly, this is complete nonsense. Companies don't really care about the credit rating of a country. In fact, we've seen a trend where many corporations have taken initiatives to ensure that they could circle around this whole thing. For example, they have literally lobbied for laws that allow everyone to get access to loans regardless of what their credit rating is. Companies directly benefit through all of this. They don't want your regulations. They would rather come to countries that don't have such regulations in place. But secondly, also note that a lot of the times, these corporations can only impact the country insofar as they have significant incentive to stay. What significantly changes the point in time in which you implement most of their policies? Firstly, the point in time in which you have actively raised taxations, the companies have an incentive to pull out. But even if they're not pulling out, a lot of these corporations will still have to cut down on many of their spendings, meaning to say that less employment for a lot of individuals, which is where local population will be impacted on a direct level, less investing in local markets to ensure that there is some return there, because they don't need to do that anymore, given that they have to cut down on costs. But moving on to the last contention here, right? They're talking about that public services will not be impacted in any significant way, right? Like Malaysia has had a healthcare system that is freaking amazing. Like you cut down on future expenditure, it won't be impacted in any significant way. Look, maintenance cost is a very real thing. The fact that your healthcare has been so good for the longest times means that Malaysia spends significant amount of its GDP on maintaining this healthcare system. A proper universal healthcare system is very, very difficult to maintain. The fact that this third world country has done a fantastic job means that it spends tremendous amounts of money maintaining the healthcare system annually every year. They're going to have to defend a world where this healthcare system is impacted, because that is literally among the areas in which you're going to have to withdraw a lot of the expenditure. Secondly, a lot of this also bleeds down into the agricultural industry. The fact of the matter remains is that a lot of the times the government subsidies towards these agricultural industries is exactly what has kept a lot of people employed within there. Because firstly, there's a subsidy so you can like buy a lot of natural resources you need to grow out your products, and then you can sell off to the market that still exists within that country. The point in time in which government subsidies are directly cut, most of the agricultural industry will take a hit. This is another population that you could potentially lose out on the next election. So what we have proven to you in this debate is twofold. Firstly, we told you what is the differentiating factor when it comes to the election. It is that conservative Malay population that we are likely to sustain, the point in time in which there's less sense of betrayal. But secondly, we told you how public services and amenities that are essential for the public will have to take a hit, because this is exactly where Malaysia spends a lot of its money when it comes to ensuring that the quality is retained. These are two areas in which we win this debate. For all those reasons, proud to oppose.
Why is CG the most important in today's debate? Is that, first of all, I think we've told you the exclusive nuances when it comes to who exactly are players when it comes to Pakatan. The ability for Mahathir and Anwar to say that, look, we are very good at reduce the government's debt, and only then will you have enough ability for you to mobilize the kind of utilities that you already have in order for you to gain your big mega projects at the end of the day. Also, Azim did a good job at telling you that context here is necessary, that a lot of the mega projects that they wanted to talk about that bring in so much money is highly contingent on the stability of other nations also. When he has told you, when it comes to a lot of the key players, and in fact are countries like China, like America, like Saudi, are your countries that are dealing through their own problems as of now, and exactly why it is oftentimes unstable. And a lot of these projects also take a lot of time in order for them to gain the kind of money either way. And at least in our time frame, at least we can promise you actual stability. Because Azim told you also that if we feel that because of you being so ambitious, you want your projects like your national cars, for example, is that BN can definitely use this against us. Is that they can say, look, they didn't gain much money, your debt is higher, that's exactly why they're not all good at spending money because they're a new government. Anyways, please come back to us. These are the kind of things that can happen anyways. And Azim told you things like austerity measures are things that are easy for people to understand because like I said, Mahathir Anwar pulled this off, people will likely believe in them. Sit down. So what exactly did CEO tell you? So number one, they say that apparently, this whole nostalgia thing, look, people can be nostalgic with UMNO also lah. But what nostalgia are you talking about? Because when UMNO made money, who was in UMNO? That's right, Anwar and Mahathir, right? And also, when it comes to the betrayal themselves by UMNO, it was probably done by Najib. MPH is doing a great job at dealing that we are giving people what they want. You want to see Najib and Rosma in jail, then we'll give you that. That's exactly what people have been providing to you. And if we promise you, if we provide you stability, then that's even better. And they told you, like, apparently your people in this particular state are your people are in vulnerable population, for example. And right now the comparative is that it's being charged with terms that Mahathir and Anwar are being available, for example, is the ability for them to constantly provide the ability for people to see that we can make sure that the economy grows either way. And this whole idea of people angry backtracking also, there's not much trends when it comes to this, when it's only just a minority of people being angry anymore. And they also tell you that apparently we still have some money, so that's why like we can still do all these high-risk projects, right? But then if you're doing high risk and any bumps along the way, then UMNO can themselves say that that's exactly why it's so bad, because these governments are new. That's why they don't know how to spend exactly money, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. If we at least provide stability, then that's better. And we talk about how apparently corporations don't apparently like care much about credit ratings, so that's why it's good. Look, but we will still say that corporations will still stay either way because there's room for development in order for like room for development. For example, we already have certain infrastructures that enables these countries to come in anyways, because a lot of your mega projects oftentimes means that you have to build a lot of new things and you require a lot of money. And the investments in itself takes a bunch of time. Either way, we can use that time frame in order for us to encapsulate like actual stability. That's better, anyways, right? We think that's better. So when it comes to they say that apparently these projects affect your middle class the most. These people don't feel like their lives are being enriched, but also how enriched can you feel when just because let's say there's a new MRT line, for example, right? These things take time anyways, like the ability for you to like grow jobs and stuff, but we actually provide to you that the likelihood of your projects being successful is also really low when a lot of the key players in itself are in problematic positions, right? That's why we use austerity first, later you get your particular projects, because a lot of your projects rely on your outsiders anyways. Second, they say that Pakatan won because BN was irresponsible, right? Corrupt, and the austerity measures like GST made people angry. So if you do austerity measures, people will hate you and vote for VM. Look, it's not just GST anyways. Like, it's just one. GST is probably like one thing, but it's all the corruption, your mega projects not churning much when it's so reliant on outsiders, like China, for example, your unfair trade deals because you want more money inside your pockets, which is exactly that. It's like more money in their pockets. BN failing because they have all these big projects that don't bring in much money, plus they corrupt some more. If you give them stability, at least reduce the debt, we can build credibility in order for people to have access to these projects later, that they would still vote for us either way. Because Azim told you, like, they still believe in people like Anwar and Mahathir. They still love them, and if they pull it off in the 90s, then they can pull it off later. Like all that a few years of them making sure that our ability to grow money is able, and later he can build his Jaya or KLCC. We think that that's enough proof for people to at least stay like patient and understand the situation either way, because that's what people understand anyways, because they know that we're in a very shitty situation. And the criticize say that governments don't tell us what exactly austerity measures mean, what exactly are doing, but at the same time, they also don't know what kind of projects that they want either way, because suddenly, like, they say they don't want MRT, so what kind of projects do you want? You want a new car? Is it to build a factory, fill it all up with Malaysians, and then Malaysians also suddenly have enough money in their pockets to buy that car somehow? Like, where exactly is all the money coming from if you yourself cannot provide to us a proper process, as in the kind of projects that can be successful in order for them to gain that much money as of now before the next election? Because at least under our side, we've proven to you that if you at least be stable, you show the numbers are doing okay at least, then that way people can still vote for you. If your numbers go down and UMNO can use this kind of rhetoric in order for them to vilify you, then that's worse. Yeah, sure.
So we are nowhere near the Asian financial crisis of 98, right? At this point in time, even the Greek Prime Minister was voted out for implementing austerity measures in 2008 in his own country that was going through a default. Given that we are nowhere near that kind of economic crisis, why would people be understanding?
Okay, so people would still be understanding because, like I told you, we've already set the precedent and means that the ability for people to still believe in this particular system can still be there. Like we all agree, your
people are very highly nostalgic. That's why they will still believe in these actors when they have worked so well in the past, and they can do it, definitely work their magic again. That's why people vote for them, right? And not some other party, right? So then when they say that it doesn't work out, that's when BN can say that they don't know how exactly to deal with these particular projects. And at the end of the day, that in order for you to make sure that your high mega projects work, that you need to gain trust from the world themselves. When you provide to the world that your credit rating is higher, for example, your debt is becoming lower, and your people are actually okay, we think that that's the only reason why and your other countries also get their shit together eventually. So that's when you can start building your mega projects, when you actually are stable enough. We feel like we're the only ones who provide to you that in order for us to gain the trust of these people, we kept showing you that there are precedences where this has happened. We just need to be patient. Economies go in circles anyways. We'll be growing later on.
Thank you. And how things come with good CEO's case opposition with.
It's so hot.
No F1 bro.
Yeah. So I think
Shut down. So like, shut down.
so you're supposed to switch off at 6, but they extended it to 7.
But it's not austerity.
Yeah, it's something university's austerity measure.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the problem in this debate is that there are inherently many claims being put forward by both sides of the House with very little leeway of being able to look in a compromising position and moderate in terms of assessing the impact of either and weighing it up. On the one hand, you have an opening government who says that we have a problem with fiscal expenditure that is irresponsible. And on the other hand, you have an opening opposition that says that the people in general backtracking with Pakistan's policies is going to be very harmful. In closing opposition, we're giving you a very simple claim. Our claim is that uniquely the group that you jeopardize, the people who have some attachment to UMNO, are in fact the ones who kept you in power, are in fact the ones who voted you in power. And even if the debt may hurt, as Mubarak suggests, the optics of the economy means that Malaysia still prospers as an economy. I'm going to do 3 things in my debate. Firstly, let's take CG out. Secondly, how you solidify the probability of winning in 2021. Thirdly, will the economy prosper? Firstly, let's take CG out. So CG says very simply that people trust Pakatan Harapan because Mahathir and Anwar did a good job, and you embolden UMNO rhetoric when they can point to the irresponsibility as a sign of instability of the government. Let's break down this claim via 2 prongs, right? The first thing they say is that Mahathir has pulled all this off before. Then they assume then that this trust then translates from 1990 to the current world. I have 2 things to say here. Firstly, in the 90s, Mahathir was the pioneer of healthcare. He was the pioneer of fiscal stimulus. In fact, I would posit that he was the one who portrayed the goods and merits of spending a lot on your government. He was not someone who was fine with capital controls. He was, austerity. So if anything, I think history is not on your side in this case. Now, secondly, this doesn't deal with the current context we have as to the ways we perceive governments and the accountability we give the government. This means, sure, we may have trusted Mahathir and Anwar in 1990, but the fact is the populist wave that currently exists in Malaysia suggests that people genuinely believe that the power is in fact in the people. This means even though Mahathir and Anwar currently are icons of Malaysia, this doesn't mean that they're immune to the sort of criticism that they assert will happen. Context has changed, they didn't deal with that context. Next thing they say is stability will be UMNO will point to the fact that you are unstable because you're irresponsible with those finances. The assumption here is that people are going to sense some instability in that current economy. The reason this is untrue is because what are debts? Debts are just numbers on your paper. Literally, that's what it looks like. Versus the viscerality of looking at government austerity as a sign of desperation. In fact, I would say that austerity looks like instability more than debts do. This means that in terms of perceptions, I would argue, in fact, that people perceive people perceive austerity as a sign of instability as opposed to not, because debts are just numbers. People generally perceive these things in more reasonable ways. But here's the thing, right? They may say that the people feel indebted because the debt affects the future generations. The thing is, people generally don't care about future generations. That's why you see general consensus on climate change not necessarily moving forward and not necessarily moving very progressively. This means the conclusion to all this is very simple, is that in fact we think on a balance, it is fiscal stimulus that in fact perceives people as a government that is successful as opposed to austerity. We take that point. Secondly, how you solidify the probability of winning in 2021 by leading to political bloc. Look, very clear. We're very similar to OO, right? But we distinguish in very, very important ways. Here's why. Because Mass says that people won't trust these people, like the government, when they backtrack on their promises. The reason this is uncomparative is because you assume that people as a whole would vote for BN otherwise in this instance. It is unclear why they will make that choice if Mubarak is right, that the current context has changed to be that people feel as if the government is responsible. Matt did not tell you, didn't tell you why specifically they will make that choice. Itza uniquely tells you that they embolden the UMNO rhetoric of being able to claim that they're limiting your access in these scenarios. There's a specific nuance that Itza gave you based in terms of the group analysis that we gave you in the circumstance. We analyze the context involved with this debate. Then Patrick says, but gerrymandering is not going to be a problem anymore, so we don't have to care about conservatives. Gerrymandering only works insofar as numbers are distorted against your favor. Here's the thing about Malay conservatives, Patrick. They are everywhere. Literally, they have the highest numbers in the country, and gerrymandering, in fact, has not halted their ability to vote in this instance. There'll be I don't say there'll be a problem, but there'll be a political bloc regardless. So you have to deal with that in this scenario. Next thing Mubarak says is that people want responsibility. This is where our extension shines, right? Because this is what OO misses out. Sure, people may want responsibility, but these are the people that you will get otherwise under both sides of the house, i.e. Pakatan Harapan and Malay liberals, because you appeal to an anti-BN in nature. And the outside of the house, the people Malay conservatives don't care about the responsibility of the government insofar as it means that you hurt their ability to access very important things. That's when you lose them. That's when you lose the election in the future. Now, next framing is that we have to have long-term re-elections. We're going to have to pay these things off eventually. Firstly, they obviously assumes you have long-term obviously assume there's a long-term to have, right? Insofar as you voted in 2021, you'd have a long-term to care about. Most governments centered their decision-making ability and decision-making decisions on how best to win the next election, because the possibility of losing the next election is so very damaging. This means if we prove to you that at least you're able to win, the probability of you winning the next election is higher, that means we take the debate on that as well. The upshot of this is very, very simple, right? Because we solidify the support of a unique group that is likely to move to BN otherwise, that then means that the trade-off we have to make of the long-term considerations of that is not worth it. Opening.
So let's clarify. The off-bench's economic policy is keep on doing the same thing we've been doing before, keep spending until it becomes so bad like the Greek government that austerity measures can't work anymore because the situation is already that bad.
You assume that debt is inherently a bad thing, right? Because the vast majority of the countries in the world, in fact, run on debt. Just look at Japan, for example. They have negative interest rates, and their debts run in the billions. And the reason why they're still prosperous is because they create business atmospheres that appeal to other corporations to enter. This leads me to my next point. So, OG tells you that people have higher debts means corporations won't enter. OO adds that subsidy is very important. It is a uniquely incentive structures, the fact that they care about profits, the fact that they care about optics, and why this suggests that corporations are still more likely to enter than to not. Subsidies mean it's very profitable for them to enter because it means that they can save and skive off money out of the government because they give them subsidies. But more crucially, he tells you that the creation of atmospheres that invite businesses means that the economy is going to be more prosperous. The optics of the debate, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that you have less tax, less burden, and people generally don't feel as if there's a crisis, it's a chicken and egg situation where you in fact create more economic prosperity because more economic benefit is created. Uniquely, this makes it better. We've been in all contexts. I'm very proud to propose.
I was only checking. Nice one, but I